Welcome into episode 114 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm Augustrometer.
New Macs get physical with their mics. What's the internet for again? And making laws to handle mishandled data. So much security stuff on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. There is a cool new security feature in Apple's latest hardware. According to a piece from Business Insider, Apple's new MacBook Air and 2018 MacBook Pros disconnect the microphone when you close the lid to stop hackers from eavesdropping on your conversations. You may have thought that Apple hardware did that already, and in the best of all possible worlds, you'd be right. But we don't live in the best of all possible worlds. We live on Earth. In the past, attacks like the fruit fly malware made it possible for compromised machines to listen in on people when those people thought the compromised machine was sleeping. Apple's newest laptops physically disconnect their own microphones when you close the lid. According to the piece from Business Insider, it's Apple's T2 security chip that the company includes in its latest lineup of MacBook Air and MacBook Pros that physically disconnects the microphones when the lid is closed. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how does that work? I mean, when I started reading the article, I assumed that they had just designed something as clever as, the refrigerator light, right? A very physical thing. And yet this is saying that the T2 chip actually goes in there and disconnects the microphone for us.
See, I think you are closer to right than you imagine with your refrigerator light analogy. And honestly, the article is slightly misleading. If you look at the documentation Apple has, it never says that the T2 chip powers off the microphone. It says, and I'm quoting, all Mac portables with the T2 chip have a hardware disconnect that ensures the microphone is disabled when the lid is closed. So it never really says T2 chip does it.
Okay, here's the problem I'm having, because you say you think the Business Insider article is misleading, and I would argue, because yes, you and I talked about this before the show, because I've been trying to figure out, how does the T2 chip do this? And then you said the whole thing about, well, Apple doesn't actually say the T2 chip does this. And I went back and read the same thing that you're talking about right now, and you're right, Apple does not say that. They did, however, put it in the T2 chip white paper. They're implying it, right? I mean, they're not saying it. They're saying all this stuff about the T2 chip, and then they're like, oh, and by the way, Macs with the T2 chip also have the microphone physically disabled when you shut the thing. Putting it in the T2 paperwork makes it sound like it's the T2, right? Whether it is or not.
I haven't read the white paper. I'm going off their security overview of the T2 chip.
Okay, maybe it's not. I may be using the wrong term. I apologize. It was something that Apple had published though about the T2. It's on page 13, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then in the conclusion, the document says combining the T2 chip with a hardware disconnect to ensure the microphone is disabled. ... Mm-hmm. So I really don't think the two are connected. I think it's just one of those things that is an additional security feature, allows Apple to kind of slip it in, and it also allows them to differentiate which models have it and which ones don't. They just say, do you have a T2 chip or above? Yes. Okay. Well, then the microphone's disabled when it's closed.
All right. Forgive me for being completely cynical. You honestly don't think that Apple is saying, and here's another cool thing about the T2 chip, machines with it, the microphone does this. You don't feel like they're pairing those two pieces of information together intentionally to make it sound like the T2 chip is more than it is?
I think they probably are. They're putting it in a place where it's all of that information is sort of all in one place rather than, issuing the T2 document and then a second press release saying, oh, by the way, the microphone shuts off too. To me, that would be confusing. So they're kind of putting all of their security eggs in one document.
Right. But then labeling it all T2.
Yeah.
See, that annoys me. Because what you could do is you could talk about just, the amazing, wonderful design stuff that Apple does. Like, look at this. I mean, the only thing is, as soon as you say it, then everybody watching is like, wow, we haven't been doing that for 20 years already? I mean, because it really is. I mean, if it really is the refrigerator light, it really is that simple.
Yes.
Right? I mean, this is a thing that we could have been doing the whole time. Now, for those of you wondering whether it also works with the camera, no, of course not. Because if you close the lid, the camera's blocked. You can't see anything anyway. And Apple was good enough to point that out in the same documentation. I will say this is excellent news. If you've got a laptop, especially one of the newest laptops laying around, now all you have to worry about is, your iPhone and your iPad and the Google Home that you bought, or maybe the Amazon Echo, or whatever weird Internet of Things toy that some distant relative sent to your kid because your home security isn't their issue. And besides, they're not as savvy as you are. Let's face it. The other thing that I found interesting about this piece, I hear this and I think to myself, win, right? Business Insider, on the other hand, I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. It's possible that they really think that Apple should go further on the mic killing move. On the other hand, they may just know that beating up on Apple is often a winning strategy, at least as far as generating clicks. They think that there are a few other things that Apple could do, and in fact should do, to make the Mac even more secure. Something like a physical switch or a key for the Mac that would let you turn off the microphone even when the lid is open. That feels to me like, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, there are things that could do that. And they kept mentioning a piece of software. I can't remember what it's called. Not Overwatch. That's a game. They kept mentioning pieces of software that will actually let you know when your camera or your microphone have been turned on and you didn't do it. I mean, and so I guess we do have solutions out there. You could do that kind of thing if you want to. It's hard for me to imagine Apple putting in a physical switch or a physical key because, I mean, well, I think Johnny Ive hears the idea and immediately can't stop throwing up.
Exactly. I think it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it's really necessary. What I would like to see is very much like what they do with video, where when the camera is on, it shows you a green light saying the camera's on. Mm-hmm. I would love to see that when the microphone is on as well. That would eliminate any sort of Johnny Ive disasters, and still kind of let people know what's going on with their own hardware.
I mean, the one thing though is, malware, it seems to me, would be able to turn on your camera without turning on that light. If it's software accessible, yes. Right. So,
and obviously that's what they're trying to get away from is, things like that, getting away from being able to access it via software. I mean, that's one of the things the T2 chip is all about, is being able to, access your firmware only if you are allowed to.
Yeah, the whole idea of like throwing in another switch, it just seems like, in addition to, I'm joking about, would Johnny Ive ever stand for it? Because I do believe that security is at least as important, if not more important, than design to Apple. So, if Johnny Ive said, no, I can't have that button on there, I think they'd probably be like, well, do you know somebody who can? Because we're going to go ahead and put one on there anyway. The problem, though, it seems to me, is if it wasn't like an easily identifiable thing, you wouldn't, and it's too much chance for confusion. It's, 20 minutes of me going, well, I don't know why you can't hear me. And of course, you not being able to hear me because, hi, you can't hear me. That's the problem we're having. But
yeah, even on the iPhone, if you flip the silent button on the side, it's easy to do that, just sticking it in your pocket. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you're not getting rings because you accidentally made it go silent. And so then you're wondering, well, why hasn't so-and-so called me? Well, they have. You just didn't feel the vibration in your pocket. So I completely agree. I think a switch would cause so much confusion.
There's one other thing that I'm wondering, and I'm not looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the iFixit teardown of this machine, because I want to know if it really is just something as simple as the refrigerator light. What I'm not looking forward to is the number of stories that come out afterwards that are like, oh, remember when you thought it was the T2 chip? Yeah, it turns out not. I wonder, honestly, if that's going to end up leading to blowback. But
my prediction is that it's using the same functionality that turns the display off when you close the lid. and they use magnetic. It's a magnetic switch. It's called a Hall effect sensor. If you have a paperclip, you can run it around the inside bezel of your laptop, just to see kind of where that sensor or where the magnet is. And when that magnet is close to the sensor in the base of the computer is when it shuts the display off. And I think they probably do the same thing. They just power off the microphone as soon as the display is closed.
The musical Avenue Q sang, "The internet is for porn," and at least one government employee seems to have taken that to heart. A piece from TechCrunch says a U.S. government network was infected with malware thanks to one employee's extensive history of watching porn on his work computer, investigators have found. The piece says the audit found that a U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS network at the Eros Center, I love that. For this story, I love that Eros is in there because it sounds dirty, but it is in fact a satellite imaging facility in South Dakota. The Eros Center was infected after someone who worked there visited thousands of porn pages that contained malware, which downloaded to his laptop and exploited the USGS network. The guy proceeded to save a lot of the images he found to an unauthorized USB device and a personal Android cell phone, both of which were connected to his government-issued computer. Not surprisingly, the Android cell phone was also infected with the malware. Now, I found myself in the uncomfortable position of asking you, August, and Nick from Secure Mac whether there are safe porn sites. And I had to explain that it really was for the show. I want to tell you why. I mean, here's the reason. The internet is for porn. I mean, it's not really, but it is. It's not really... but it is. Leave some people unattended with access to the World Wide Web, and they're going to go looking for porn. And here's the thing, they're going to find it. I'm not judging. I'm not casting aspersions. I'm stating a fact. Not all people are going to do that, but a heck of a lot of people are going to do that. And so what I found myself... I'm
going to disagree with you because I believe that there are two types of people in this world. Those that look at porn on the internet and liars.
And those who lie about it. Yeah, I know that. I know that. Man, I remember being told that a long time ago about something else. See, what I found myself wondering was, did Eros or the USGS block the commonly known sites, right? Leading this individual to hunt up sites that were less well known and thus not blocked.
You know, without knowing more details about what they did from a sysadmin point of view, I'd have to say that's exactly what happened. That this guy had, he found out that sites were blocked, so he went and found sites that weren't. And because, new sites pop up every single day, some of them trustworthy, some of them not. And I'm not talking about just porn. I mean, just everything. I forget what the rate is, the number of pages added to the internet a day, but it's ridiculous. And so he obviously found some sites that were not blacklisted, downloaded some stuff that he shouldn't have, and it caused problems.
See, I can't even imagine how you would keep up, though, because you're right. I mean, with just the number of sites cropping up every day of all sorts, I mean, I would think a blacklist would be good for maybe 5 minutes if the person who is looking is, going to be diligent about looking for the kind of thing they're looking for. Now, here's the thing. A good blacklist, a bad blacklist, whatever. I mean, in this case, it might not have helped. The answer that I got back from one of the Nikolai was... one of the most commonly known sites is generally pretty safe, though he went on to say, I believe there have been cases of malicious ads making it to those mainstream porn sites, but those typically try and infect computers running Windows or mobile devices running Android. So this still would have ended up being an issue for Eros and for the USGS. For its part, IT for the USGS says not having enough sites blocked was one issue, and the open USB port was another issue. Now, because this is not what I do on a daily basis, I forget that locking down or disabling a USB port is a possibility. But, once I'm reminded, it really seems like a no-brainer.
Well, it is sort of a no-brainer. I don't know if you remember the movie Skyfall, but, they found the bad guy's laptop and the first thing they did was connected it to the British Secret Service's network. And then, of course, it affected the network and everything went kablooey. And, that's anyone in security. The first thing they're going to do is isolate that and make sure it has no access to anything. When you have a USB port, anyone can hook anything up to that. And then once that, whatever it is, has access to the computer, and the computer has access to the network, all kinds of fun things can happen.
Yeah, well, you have to really quickly run down the hall and shut down the mainframe.
Exactly.
If movies and TV have taught me anything, that's what you do.
Dodging raptors, probably, too.
Probably, yeah. Or, people opening drawers that you have to slide under or something as you go. Here's the thing. So, okay, disabling the USB port. That's what they're saying USGS should have done with this computer. What I'm wondering, though, is how would that work exactly? Like, if you disable the USB port, does it kill the port entirely? Or are there ways to make some devices safe while blocking others? Like, I don't know, the phone you give me as my employer versus me, sticking just a thumb drive or something like that. And I mean, is it all or nothing as far as killing those?
Well, it really depends on what sort of device management software the organization is using. It can get pretty granular. You can block USB devices based on kind of functionality, what they do. So, for example, on a new MacBook Pro, you've got the Thunderbolt / USB-C, which is also your power. So it wouldn't block power, but it might block a hard drive being connected to it. You could do things like that. Whether you can allow individual devices really depends on the management software.
The other thing I'm wondering about is when we talk about a blacklist, I mean, obviously what you don't want is somebody at USGS going to, 1, 2, 3, triple XYZ and going, oh no, this is bad. We got to block this. I guess two questions I have. First of all, have you ever had to blacklist sites? I mean, having been, CTO of a couple of companies. And then where do you get that list? Because I assume you're not waiting for somebody to stumble across something and go, no, we got to do something else now.
Yeah, fortunately, I've never had to deal with that myself. The employees that we've had were fairly diligent and, if they were doing that stuff, they were doing it at home, quite honestly. As far as where you would get a list, there are quite a few available. Prior to hitting the record button today, I was kind of looking around. I found one that listed over 2 million sites. And that was something that was kept by the community. So it was constantly being updated. But as you said earlier, 5 minutes after it's published, it's out of date because probably another 20 sites have popped up. Very hard to maintain something like that.
The TechCrunch piece says investigators recommended that USGS enforce a strong blacklist policy of known unauthorized websites and regularly monitor employee web usage history. The report also said that the agency should lock down its USB drive policy, restricting employees from using removable media on government devices, but it's not known if the recommendations have yet gone into place. USGS did not return a request for comment. Now, if you're waiting for the other shoe to drop on this story, thankfully there's not one. Eros monitors and archives images of the planet's land surfaces. It does not operate any classified networks, so the piece says any significant harm to national security has been ruled out. But the malware that was found helps enable data exfiltration and is also associated with ransomware attacks, which doesn't do a lot to bolster my faith in government security. We'll head to D.C. in a moment, but don't worry, we're not talking politics. I'll explain in a few, but first a word about MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. If you think having a Mac is all the malware protection you need, hi, welcome to our show. This must be your first time here because if you've been listening for any length of time, you know, sadly, having a Mac is not all the protection you need. You have to stay ahead of the bad guys, and MacScan 3 can help. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It's developed by Secure Mac, trusted names in computer security and developers of exceptional security software for the Mac for well over a decade. MacScan 3 detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your computer. Say goodbye to worry and hello to security with MacScan 3 from Secure Mac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by Secure Mac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. We'll wrap the day with a story about which you can do something, though not directly. In the 2 years plus that this show's been going, we've heard of chip makers hiding vulnerabilities. We've heard of credit card tracking firms and sandwich makers and retailers losing sensitive user information. And at least one social network has lost your information over 27 times just since this episode began. Okay, not really, but you get the idea. In most cases, the remedy has been a couple of years of free credit reports, as well as well-crafted assurances and apologies. Now, one lawmaker wants to make sure that executives have real skin in the game. Engadget says Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat from Oregon, released a draft of the Consumer Data Protection Act, which will create new protections for consumer information and strict punishments for those found to be abusing user data. The proposed bill would send senior executives to jail for 10 to 20 years if they fail to follow the guidelines for data use. The proposed legislation calls for the Federal Trade Commission to have jurisdiction. They'd be given the ability to penalize a company up to 4% of its revenue for its first violation. Companies would also be required to submit regular reports to the FTC to disclose any privacy lapses that have occurred. Companies making more than $1 billion in revenue and handling information for more than 1 million people, and smaller companies handling the data of more than 50 million people, would be subject to the regular check-ins. Failure to comply would carry a punishment of potential jail time for executives. Now, when I first read this story, my immediate thought was good. But I've been back and forth a couple of times now. I'm curious what your immediate thought is, August.
Well, I think even on this show, several episodes back, I mentioned that, it would be nice to have some sort of data protection laws, very much like we have for HIPAA, which, protects health information, but to protect consumer information. This sounds like a good step in that direction. I do think the jail time penalties are a little bit steep, especially because, the executives of a company aren't necessarily the ones who can actually make sure that this stuff is going on. They can hand down, rules and things like that. But when it comes to implementing it, there are just so many different kind of avenues and things that could go wrong that to pin it on the CEO just because an engineer, left a laptop on, or something like that seems a little strict to me.
Agreed. See, that's the thing. That's where I go back and forth. I mean, to say 10 to 20 years, obviously there would be trials. Obviously there would be due process. Obviously there would be appeals. The thing that I'm thinking about is, and I'm not saying that he should be jailed. Just as an example, though, how many times is Mark Zuckerberg just going to get to say sorry? Do you know what I mean? At some point, should there be some sort of accountability? Jail time, first of all, I don't think jail time is necessarily automatic. Second, I don't know that that ever happens to somebody like a Zuckerberg. But this doesn't sound like somebody left a laptop open and something bad happened at that point. It sounds more like an abuse thing. Or maybe I'm still too much of a Pollyanna. My assumption is that the threat out there of, listen, you could get in real trouble would make people shape up so we would never get to that point.
Sure. I think penalizing the company is all good and fine. As a matter of fact, it's probably the better route because when you penalize a company, especially if it's a publicly traded company, the shareholders are going to demand somebody's head on a pitchfork if it keeps happening. And Facebook is a weird situation because I think he's impossible to oust from that company, just because of the way his shares are structured. So maybe there are some penalties that you levy against executives after so many breaches. But to go 10 to 20 years on the first try just seems a little harsh.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think probably the reason that we even know about this story and we're talking about it is because he said 10 to 20 years for executives, right? Because if it was just,
Yeah.
A Democrat from Oregon thinks we should strengthen data privacy laws, that doesn't get any headlines. So,
Good point.
I mean, which is not to say, but again, I mean, maybe it does have to be skin in the game, right? I mean, different things that have happened just since we've started doing this show, not you and I, but since this show's been going, are things like you had the CEO of Intel know about major potential breaches. And so the very first thing he did was sold as much stock as he could and still be CEO of Intel before he let other companies know, then before eventually letting governments know. This is a man who's not afraid.
Yeah, to me, that sounds like criminal behavior.
Well, except apparently there's no law against it. And so, I mean, that's kind of the interesting thing about the Wyden stuff. Now, there's a difference here. What was it, Kranich? Is that the CEO of Intel? I can't remember which one it was. So I'll just say the CEO of Intel because I can't remember his name. What he did, I mean, this wouldn't even affect that because what this is talking about is actually, people losing information, companies,
right.
Getting hacked and my information suddenly being on the dark web or being on a Russian server someplace or something like that. So, I mean, the Intel thing doesn't even really apply except for the part where he obviously had no fear. The thing that he was most afraid of was apparently losing his job and his stock tanking. So, anyway. There is an idea tied up in this legislation that I do like, again, at least in theory. The piece says the legislation would also institute a do not track list. When a consumer joins the list, companies would be barred from sharing their data with third parties or using it to serve up targeted advertisements. As a trade-off, companies would be given permission to charge customers on the do not track list a fee to use their products and services to make up for lost ad revenue. Even if consumers don't choose to join the list, they would be granted the ability to review information collected about them, see who it has been shared with or sold to, and challenge any inaccuracies. What I like about this is the fact that you can opt out of all the tracking, although, as is often the case, I worry that we'll just click OK in the same way that we click that we've read and agreed to all the terms of service agreements that we've never actually read. I mean, am I going to pay for Facebook? I doubt it. And they'll probably write whatever, opt out, opt in clause in ways that'll either make you think the data collection and sharing, sound completely innocent, or it'll be so convoluted that I'll just, get bored and click OK because I don't want to spend money and I do want to argue with somebody that I went to high school with.
I don't like, obviously I love the idea of a do not track list, but I don't like the idea of trading dollars for ad revenue, simply because most people are not going to pay for those services and they're going to go ahead and give all their data to Facebook anyway. And then you look at companies like Hulu, for example, which charges you a monthly fee, but then still shows you advertising. So, I think doing the trade-off thing and letting the company sort of recoup some of that, I don't like that at all. I understand the impetus for it and why they would want to throw that in the bill, but I just don't like that idea.
Overall, I got to say, this whole thing is easy for me to like because the chances of it happening are slim and none, and Slim just left town, as my dad used to say. Engadget wraps up its piece. He probably still does say it. I just haven't heard him say it in a while. I'm sorry, that sounded weird. No, it's a thing I learned from my dad. Anyway, Engadget wraps up its piece saying, Wyden's proposal would mark a major change in how companies handle consumer data and offer real consequences for those who fail. Turning it into law will likely present a major challenge. While consumer advocates and privacy-minded companies like DuckDuckGo have lent their support, companies with massive amounts of user data and equally big lobbying budgets are likely to push back against it. And I'm sure they'll be totally above board about that. Guess who I had lunch today? Mark Zuckerberg will tweet. And wouldn't that be funny? Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, there's a place that I would love for you to go check out. It is securemac.com/checklist. There you'll find notes for this show and for all the shows that we've done before and any shows to come once they actually get here. securemac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.